This week we're looking at anger. That's a fun one, right? So I actually volunteered for this. I'm not trying to come forward specifically, but I think a lot of men have some experience with anger. So I thought we might jump into this today. But here's what I want to do is Scott had given us some passages, and I'd like us to look those up. So if I could get somebody to look up Proverbs 25:28. And then someone to take 29:11, and we'll read those two. And then what I really want you to do is we're going to be looking up and reading quickly 8 passages, okay, out of Proverbs that kind of circle this idea. But what I want you to listen to is obviously listen to each passage. But I want you to make a little bit of a file as you're going and saying, what are all of these things saying together as a group of thoughts? What do I make out of all of this? Okay, so that's the assignment as we listen. Is don't just listen to each one, but feel like you're making something out of Legos here. Okay, so who has 25:28? Go ahead.
25:28. Like a city that is broken into and without walls is a man who has no control over his spirit.
Okay. 29:11.
Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end.
Okay. Can you read that one more time? A little louder.
Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm to the end. In the end.
Okay. Now let's go to 13:3, and then someone else go to 20:25. We're going to read those two.
He who guards his lips guards his life, but he who speaks rashly will come to ruin.
Okay. And then 20:25. It's like Bible Bowl.
It is a trap to dedicate something rashly and only later to consider one's vow.
One more time.
It is a trap to dedicate something rashly and only later to consider one's vow.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, now let's jump over to chapter 12:16. And then those of you that aren't flipping real quick, go to 19:11. So 12:16. Who's got that?
Fools show their annoyance at once, but the prudent overlook an insult.
Okay. And 19:11.
Good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense.
Okay. Last two. Chapter 19:22. And then 29:22. Sure.
What is desired in a man is steadfast love, and a poor man is better than a liar.
Okay. I got that wrong. That was supposed to be 19:11 and 19. Sorry. You go back and read 19:19.
A man of great wrath will pay the penalty, for if you deliver him, you will only have to do it again.
Anybody raised a teenage boy? Yeah. Amen. All right, and then 19:22.
No.
29.
Oh, I'm sorry. 29, yes, you are. Yeah, I'll let you guys do this. 29:22.
An angry person stirs up conflict, and a hot-tempered one increases rebellion.
Okay. So, Scott talked this morning about the heart. And he talked about the heart versus the head, kind of, right? And in some ways, he was saying that the head is the head of the church, not just our brains, but, because we need to pay attention to what God thinks when we're thinking through things. But we kind of know this inherently, that we both think logically and we think emotionally. As you're thinking about these passages that we've just read, what were some of the themes? What were you able to build out of some of those Legos? What seems to keep coming up over and over in those passages? Quick. Good. That's an excellent word. If it was money day, I'd give you money. Sorry. What else? Consequences. Yes. In some cases, consequences for being quick. Were they all about anger? Wisdom brings slowness. What was the other thing? Calmness. Good. What was in there that wasn't about angry? Foolishness. What other words were used? Rashness. Yeah. Self-control. Right? So, one of the big questions that Scott might say is, why in the world did God give us emotions if they're so dumb? Right? If they cause us so much trouble, why give us that? And honestly, I want to take a look at kind of the same conclusions that Scott made, but Scott looked at the forest and the trees from one side of the forest, and I'm going to come from a different side. And that is, I want to kind of introduce some ideas that kind of come out of psychology about this, because I think it's helpful for us to know how our brains work, right? Now, is there any psychology majors in here? Good. I can't be fully evaluated. So I'm just going to be sharing some things that I've been taught and that I have read and that I have experienced. So your mileage may differ. Let's just leave it at that. So we, as humans, living in the age that we live in right now, we like to think that everything is data-driven, right? That there's a scientific methodology or a math equation that can prove, right, that this is how you do things. And so I want to go back in the Wayback Machine. We have been privileged to go to Europe and visit some of the cities over there and stay in some buildings that are over 1,000 years old. Can you think of any building that's being built in Edmond today that's built for built on a 1,000-year spec? I know our freeways certainly aren't. Right? We don't build that way anymore. If you go back and you look at the pyramids, it's an interesting thing because the pyramids are geometrically perfect. They are the absolute perfect dimensions and engineering structural wise that you would build if you had all of the math available to you today to try to build that structure. The problem is that the Egyptians did not have Euclidean geometry. It hadn't been there yet. This is a great question. Well, obviously they did because it fits, right? Because it's there. But really, when you see 1,000-year-old buildings or 2,000-year-old bridges or pyramids that were obviously designed before anybody could draw it out on a CAD program. How did they do that? And they did that the way you do most things in your life, especially when you're younger, is you do it through trial and error. Well, we built it this way and it fell down, and we lost a horse. So I guess we need to build it bigger and stronger, right? And over multiple generations, you start realizing that, you know what, we just need to really build this thing really stout one time so that it doesn't break. And that's what they started doing. Okay? And so that's why some of those buildings are there, is because they just overbuilt them because they didn't know where the line was. Right? So let's use bigger timbers and bigger stones, and this thing should hold. That type of mental process is called a heuristic. And it basically means it's a shortcut. So you use these all day long. You use little shortcuts in your processes. Experience, if you have cooked and you're making a recipe and you start adding salt, do you panic and think, now wait a minute, is this going to be 2 cups of salt? Or is this going to be a teaspoon of salt? How in the world would I ever know how much salt to start with? I just should quit. No, you've cooked enough things, enough times, with enough different ingredients to know that I'm going to start with this much and see how it goes, right? And if I've doubled the recipe, you know from experience that I probably should double the salt, right? There's a risk to getting it wrong. So after you've messed it up a few times, you get pretty good at estimating on the low side of salt. You with me? Now bacon, you can put all the bacon in you want. It's not going to mess anything up. You've learned that too. So this is kind of what our brains are doing, is we're making shortcuts. Now, can you go ahead and put up the first, okay, I know you guys can't read this, so I'm just going to tell you what it is. It's called a feeling wheel, and it's basically a tool that therapists use when people come in and they are really having a hard time moving forward because they are stuck, emotionally stuck. And maybe they say, I can't stop being sad, or my wife says I'm too angry to live with, right? And I don't even know what that means, right? So I want to walk through, I'm just going to get up here where I can read it and point out just a couple of things, and I'm going to talk about, in fact, let's go to the next slide. This is anger. Can you guys read this some? Yeah. So somebody says, you're angry all the time. What are you angry about? And you go, I don't know. Why don't you know? Why can't you just suddenly know what you're angry about? Well, maybe your anger, let's look at the bottom, is because somebody's been critical with you and they treat you dismissively. And your reaction to that is that you're angry. And maybe it's a shortcut to you to feel angry anytime that happens, because where you grew up, your parents or your mother or your father or your siblings or your school teachers were always treating you this way. And you learned a shortcut that whenever I get treated that way, I get mad and I get angry. And your wife doesn't know that because she wasn't there when all of that happened. And so when she dismisses you, you use your shortcut and you get mad. Now, we use shortcuts in lots of things, and it's really helpful. Does anybody remember how they learned to walk? No? Anybody remember how they learned to ride a bike? Maybe. I'm going to tell you right up front, you do not remember how you learned to ride a bike because you didn't have any language attached to that process in your brain at all. And as much as your mom or your dad told you what to do, it was not helpful information at all. Because the reality is if you want to go left on your bicycle, you have to turn the wheel to the right to get the bike to lean so that you can catch it with the wheel to make the turn. You have to the bike wants to stay up straight. So you have to actually throw it in the direction you want to go to catch it with the wheel. and you don't learn this in language, your brain figures it out with its little lizard components. And it learns a shortcut without language on how to do that. And when you were a baby, you learned how to get mad when you didn't get your way, and you learned how to be sad when you felt a certain way. And so these are all shortcuts. I want you to think about what Scott was talking in his sermon, because in her comment, quick, right? Emotions come quick. They're shortcuts to how I feel about a thing, but they're always going to be based on a whole suite of things that you have experienced over your lifetime. So, some of the things that lead us to anger can come out of being let down, humiliated, bitter, mad, aggressive, frustrated, distant, or critical. Some of the things that are more detailed that we can feel is betrayed, resentful, disrespected, ridiculed, indignant, thank you, violated, furious, jealous, provoked, hostile, infuriated, annoyed, withdrawn, numb, skeptical, and dismissive. Let's go to the next slide. Now, why did I bring up sad? None of these passages are talking about being sad. Yeah. I want to make a proposal that's going to be wrong, but it might have an element of truth to it. And that is, men tend to react to emotional stimulus that they don't like with anger, and women sometimes react to emotional stimulus they don't like with sad. Guys, have you ever seen your wife crying and says, "I'm so mad"? And you kind of go, "I'm not sure." If you're newly married, you go, "I'm not sure how that works." Guys, how many times have you ever been angry and your wife says, "What are you so angry about?" And you go, "I don't know, I'm just sad." But you know what? Have you ever been, after a funeral or the loss of a loved one, find yourself, men, being angry? It's the direction we go. It's the direction we lean. It's the emotion. It's the shortcut. Listen to me. It's the shortcut that is most in alignment with the way men live. Because we are trying to overcome things. We are typically trying to win conflicts. We are trying to come out on top of things. We're trying to control things. Anger is the first stage in grief. And we stick it out there for quite a while. So, I don't want today to be about anger, because sadness can be just as potent for some of us in this audience as other. So, inside of sadness, we can feel, if we're trying to track down what is it that I'm actually feeling, it could be that I feel lonely, vulnerable. I could feel despair. I could feel guilty. I could feel depressed. I could feel hurt. Really quick, men, could you see how any of these feelings could make you angry? Any man willing to admit that these feelings sometimes come out as being angry? Right? That's how this works. I can feel isolated, abandoned, victimized, fragile. I'm going, man, this is making me mad just reading it. Grief, powerless, ashamed, remorseful, empty, inferior, disappointed, embarrassed. If you're a man in this crowd, you're going, that should be red. Anybody agree with me? That I sometimes experience those things as redder than blue? Ladies, when I was listing the stuff in the red, did you ever think, yeah, that makes me sad? Yeah, that's weird. That's weird. It's really important to realize that we get to these things through the journey that our life has had. And now, a lot of people would say, therefore, what I feel is justified. Right? Because this is my what? This is my experience. This is my truth. I can't help it. This is how I was raised. This is my environment, my culture. So I am justified in whatever happens when I express this shortcut to this situation, this new situation that I'm in, and I have this strong feeling, and I react to that feeling, and I potentially make other people around me pay in one way or the other because of how I feel. I feel justified at some level in doing that because that's who I am. I want to propose a different idea. That this information that you get that is quick and not always helpful, right, Scott? Is not who you were, it's what happened to you. And there is a big difference between who you are and what happened to you. Are you with me? Does that make sense? If you were beat up all the time as a child by a bunch of bullies, and you find yourself getting really angry anytime you see injustice, and it makes people around you uncomfortable, it's not because you are a victim, it's because when you were young you were treated as one. And now you're an adult and you can choose to be different. I didn't have a choice as a kid. I do have a choice as an adult. You with me? So I want you to think through, briefly, I want you to think through this idea. When is it that I start getting to choose what I'm going to do and who I'm going to be, and when I'm in charge of me? When was that for you? When was that for you? That you really started to get to decide who you were going to be, what you were going to become? Okay? Mm-hmm.
And when I moved out of the house, I started feeling empowered to make boundaries. And, these things would not continue in my life now that I'm an adult and I have a choice about where I go, who I see, and what I spend my time with.
Okay. Somebody else. What age were you when you look back and you go, that was really about the moment that I started deciding what kind of life I was going to build?
John, so my parents would say I came out that way, so I think personality plays
Sure.
into it.
Sure.
Because, I had to have my chin sewn up when I was, little, I don't remember it, and the doctor looked at my parents and said, "Who is in charge at your house?"
Mm-hmm.
And so I think personality plays a big part in that, but I also am the oldest
Mm-hmm.
of four. And so I kind of just always said, this is how my life will go.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry's the baby of 5,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember him looking at me and looking at his siblings when he was 30 and saying, for the first time, everybody back off, I have my own mind now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think some of it, as much as we get tired of hearing about birth order and personality, it definitely plays into it.
That's right. Sure. Any guy want to answer this question?
I think it's happened more than once.
Good.
In my life.
Good. What was different about the second time from the first time?
I had 2 kids when I was 21,
Mm-hmm.
and that was probably a big one. But then life changes and you change, and I went back to college when I was 43
Mm-hmm.
and got my degrees and started being a CPA. So I just think there's different phases in your life that you make a decision. I'm gonna change what I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
and just
Anybody do not answer this question. No matter what, do not answer this question. Have you ever been with your spouse in a situation where the way they reacted to a thing, you thought to yourself, that is so immature? Do you see what I'm getting at? Of course it was immature. They're using the exact same tools that they used, that they learned as shortcuts from when they were immature. Have you ever tried to address something quickly and find that it just doesn't work that way? And I don't know why I keep doing it that way. And every time I do it, I get a bad result, but it seems like the way I need to address it. It's because you're using something, quite frankly, that you probably found worked when you were 6 or 7, in a world where things like that work when you're 6 or 7. And they don't work very well like that when you're 40 or 45. So what do we do with this? Do we just say, we're all just immature emotional beings, and therefore, we just need to cut each other a ton of... No. We need to mature. And Scott brought it home, I think, really, really well when he said that our heart needs to be trained. Did you know that your emotions can be trained? They can be retrained. So how do we retrain? Guys, how do you retrain so that the point that you go, you know what, this is making me really angry, but I'm going to be smart enough to recognize that I have a sense of where my anger comes from. It comes out of shortcuts that I've used in the past. I can recognize that it may not be that helpful as a tool right now because my brain has been retrained to know that there's something bigger going on, and I'm going to choose to do a different move. What would I possibly do to retrain my brain?
I think you have to, first of all, understand that you can control those things.
Yeah.
It is a choice.
It is a choice. It is a choice to interrupt and interfere with how you feel. God gave you emotions. My wife likes to say this. Your emotions were not, what is it?
God gave you emotions. God didn't give emotions.
Correct. God did not give emotions Pat. It wasn't like you had a big set of emotions and Pat sat on top of them. These are things that you have some say over. Okay? So the trick here is what do I train my mind to? And that is to God's wisdom, to God's plan, to God's worldview. I'm going to tell you right up front, we do see Jesus get angry. We do see Jesus be emotional. And He is God. We see God's emotion all through the Old Testament. And it's emotions that man cannot stand up to, right? So we need to learn what is an appropriate response to these situations. And we have to learn that through hard-fought Bible study, hard-fought humility, spending time with God. And Paul calls it the renewal of our minds. But it's not just, I want you to hear this, ladies, we're not just all trying to become robots. We're not just renewing our minds, we're renewing our shortcuts. Does that make sense? When I first started getting interested in cooking, loved it. It was a very fun, creative outlet. I would dirty almost every dish and pan in the kitchen when I started. It was a mess. It tasted great, but it was a mess. And over time, I have learned to consolidate my processes, to reuse things, and to tidy things up as I go, and I am still married. Tell me something that you have learned over the years to do more efficiently through practice.
I can tell you a similar story.
Okay?
Angie and I are dating, we're married, and I noticed that when her mother, whenever we went up there, she had 2 sets of aunts and uncles that came to Sunday dinner. And we would sit down at a piping hot, multi-fixed stuff, and it was all hot and clean, and the kitchen was spotless. There was not a dirty dish in the kitchen. And I'd look at that, and I asked Angie after visiting there one time, how does your mother do that? And, because Angie didn't do it, I didn't do it, and my mother didn't do it, and she said, I don't know, you'll have to ask her. I asked her, she said, it's just what I do. So, and she was in there by herself. So, and wouldn't let anybody else in, so the next time we went up,
Did you ever look in the oven?
and
Just checking.
so I sat where I was looking into the living room, but I could see her working in the kitchen. And I watched how she did that. And I went, oh. I mean, it was an amazing choreography to watch. I'm not that good, but I am better about it. To clean as you go. But she knew what order to have the dishes ready for, so that the stuff that would retain heat came off first, and the stuff that isn't good at retaining heat came off last. And she put it in a serving dish, and there was hot soapy water already, and she would wash it, clean it, stack it, and it was done. It was an amazing thing. But I learned that by watching her. She couldn't explain it.
Okay. Alex?
At work, I am coming back from maternity leave, so I'm getting back into my efficiency with interacting with my patients and things.
Mm-hmm.
But after a couple years, you get pretty good at walking in and being able to do your full assessment of your patient by touching them maybe 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
Just talking to them and seeing how they are and looking, and I'm able to kind of set up my room, gauge all of everyone's interactions and relationships in a room, see how my patient is feeling, see does she need more water, how are her fluids, how are all of these things, in about 5 minutes. Whereas when I first started, I would be in the room for about an hour, being like, okay, I have to check this, and I have to check this, and I have to make sure that this is all good, and I can kind of do it in 5 or 10 minutes. And then
So let me ask you a really cool question. Do you spend more energy, now that you're doing more things in a shorter period of time, are you spending more mental energy doing it this way or the way that you did it when you first started?
much less.
Much less mental energy doing it this efficient new way. Why? Why is she spending so much less energy doing more in less time? Experience. She's now got the lizard brain working in her favor. She's not thinking in language, I need to set up this table and I need to ask these 7 questions and I need to check them. She's going through and doing this thinking about when's my lunch break? Oh, that's right, I'm a nurse, I don't get one. She's thinking about the conflict between 2 of the nurses at she's not thinking about, she's just doing it because she has done it over and over and over and picked up efficiency in it. This is what maturity really should be looking like for our hearts, is that we are pouring ourselves with our head into trying to understand who God has called us to be and what God's worldview is about. So please don't think that when we as a church encourage you to read your Bible, that we just want you to go back and read stories. We are hoping that the process is that we are all being transformed and changed from our inside out to be more and more godlike, so that our natural reactions over time with experience and repetition become more who God has called us to be. Just like the class that you taught, Pat, which was, how is it that we use the gifts of God to become more like God? So it's not just what we study, it's what we do and what we live out and what we attempt and apprentice, right? Now, before I make it sound like all we have to do is just keep working on this and we're going to be free of all of that stuff in our past, let me give you some bad news. For most of us, those tendencies and those shortcuts will never go away. You will still have the first reaction to do the dumb thing. The dumb thing you do now will still be there. You will just be more practiced at going, yeah, I'm not doing that. So instead of doing it 9 times out of 10, after some practice, maybe you'll only do it 3 times out of 10. And you need to see that as a win. And God can take care of the mess that you made in the 3 times you did it. And you can help. So, Pat?
Isn't that the essence of why
Yes.
We get to model our lives after how he actually reacted in human situations.
Can I amplify on that a bit? It's because we have to think through what was actually going on and put ourselves like we were watching it when it happened. Because if we just read the story, it's a Reader's Digest condensation, and we don't get all the other stuff. We have to, I tell class, think of it when you're reading that story like you're trying to make a movie of it. That, okay, how did I get there? What else was going on? I was thinking just this last week when the 7 were appointed in Act 6 to go make visits and the daily distribution of food to these widows, these 7 guys. Where were their wives? Is that something, how smart would it be to send 7 godly men out, but constantly going from widow's house to widow's house to widow's house without their wives there? We would not allow that today. I don't think they allow it then. But that's not in the story. Put yourself, when you read the stories, put yourself in the story. What was going on there? What else was happening?
So why is letting the anger run at the beginning so dangerous? It takes a foothold in you.
It's allowing it to be in charge.
Yes. It's allowing an emotion, can I just call it an untrained emotion? Go ahead.
So the anger isn't the problem, it's the
No.
result of. And it says, it goes on to say, do not let the sun go down on your anger and give no opportunity to the devil. So the anger isn't the problem, one, because God created that, and we see that displayed in Jesus. It's what comes after.
Right.
The devil is taking that and using that for his purposes, not God's.
I want to say this again because I think it's at the root of it, and that is that when we use these old shortcuts, these old emotional shortcuts, whether it's sadness, whether it's anger, put in whatever your go-to is, that is an untrained, unskilled response. That isn't something that you have really honed to fit the appropriate situation. I have some things in my past that I am still angry about, and even as an adult, they are justifiable to be angry about. The anger isn't the problem. But when I react to it the way I would have as a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, and I'm in my 50s, that's a problem. Does that make sense? So let's help each other. Yeah.
Anger is distinct in the emotion. I run a school. I deal with anger a lot.
Yes.
And anger is one of those things that I can stand in front of a room and say, I'm going to make you all happy. And I can't. Or I can say, I'm going to make you all sad. And I can't quite. But if I get up in front of a room and say, I'm going to make you all angry, there's a 99.9% chance I can achieve that. Because it's like a fire.
Yes.
And it takes very mature, composed, self-disciplined people to pull the heat out of the fire, to take anger in, but not put anger back out.
Yes.
And if we don't, it just spreads from person to person to person to person.
And if I'm sad, maybe I make some other people sad, but if I'm angry, someone's leaving with a bloody nose. It doesn't, not every time, but anger has the ability pretty quickly to turn into violence. Most of the emotions don't, right? So anger does hold a unique place, both in our experience and in Scripture, because violence often brings about more violence, right? How do you overcome violence? You overcome it with bigger violence, right? That's the way the world works. I'll choose a bigger weapon to overcome your anger. Let's talk about our relationships for just a second, and then I want to wrap up. how can you help your spouse when they are experiencing their emotion in ways that are not helpful? So you go, I don't know what's going on with you at the moment. I don't understand your reaction to things at the moment. Should you at that very moment say, you are acting really immature, just like John said in Bible class? How many think would be an appropriate? Yeah, try that next time.
I have anger as an issue,
Mm-hmm.
and that is one thing that it makes you more angry.
Yes.
Because you do acknowledge that you are acting a fool.
Yes.
But it doesn't help the situation.
No. There's also the passive-aggressive response, which is, okay, so who hurt you as a child? Also something I don't recommend. Calm down. Yes. One of my favorite of all times is telling your wife to calm down has never, in the history of calming down, calmed anybody down. So here's what I want to propose, is that we are here, see that? We are here to help each other. In fact, in Genesis, Eve is called a helpmeet. She's a partner. And that means partners, it's not that Adam got a partner. They both got partners to help each other. So how can we help each other? Well, number one, when the emotion that you don't really love or understand is in charge, maybe make that a moment that you let that calm down before you actually engage a meaningful discussion. Okay?
Oh, like the gentleman in the back, I was school administrator junior high. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And I had a kid that got in trouble, and we were going to go out this.
Mm-hmm.
And mom shows up at the end of the day, breathing fire.
Mm-hmm.
Had two kind of parents, helicopter parents. One was the Apache, and the other one was the Huey. She was in there to kill everything in sight. And so what I did was, it was the end of the day, everybody was tired, and I asked her, she sat down and she was just going off.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her, I said, we're not gonna get where we wanna be today.
Mm-hmm.
I said, can you come back in the morning when we
Yes.
both had a time to get over this thing?
Mm-hmm.
Talk to your kids, bring him back with you, and we'll do this in the morning, first off.
Mhm.
She said, how early can you be here, because I have to be at work. So I had to do
Mm-hmm.
a compromise. I said, okay, I'll meet you a little bit early,
Mm-hmm.
and I made sure that somebody else was in the building as well. So we got through that because we both had time to, we were tired.
Mm-hmm.
The long day, she had been at work, I'd
Yes.
been at work.
Yes.
And so the kid was mad, and so
Mhm.
the next morning it seemed to work out. Now, you still got punished.
Oh,
But
yeah.
the thing is we were all a little bit calmer about it, nobody got a black eye.
Mhm.
I didn't have to call the SRO,
Mhm.
take her out of the building or anything. So sometimes you just have to back off
Yes.
and let it go for a few minutes, or an hour, or whatever.
Yes. So choosing your moment is good. Let the thing blow over. Be part of de-escalating it, creating the space that's necessary for there to calm it down. And then at a good moment, just say, hey, would it be okay if we talked a little bit about this thing that happened? Because I'm curious what it was that got you so angry. Or men, I'm curious a little bit about what the origin of why you were so sad about that, because what you described to me wouldn't make me sad. It might make me angry, or it might make me this. So can you help me understand that a little bit? And in a calm place where you employ curiosity and care, where both of you have agreed that that's okay to do that, you can start helping the other person unpack and work their way a little bit through that wheel, right? Well, I felt really disrespected. And that's always been has being disrespected always been a hot button for you? I guess so, yeah. You see how you can start picking away and starting to learn? And if you can do that in the safe space that your marriage is supposed to be, you can start retraining each other, helping each other, work your way through some of these natural shortcuts that you've been grabbing onto maybe for your whole life, and start changing them. And so remember, God gave us emotions. We learn to use these emotions almost like toys when we're kids, not as the tools that they're really supposed to be for mature individuals. And so as we get to that point in our life where we get to make choices about who we're going to be and how we're going to react, then we need to be in that situation where we're actually retraining our hearts. And we do that by exploring this situation with somebody we trust, and slowly going through the process of replacing the worldview of a younger person with the worldview of a mature Christian and that of God himself. So, yes, this is a class on anger, but anger shows itself in lots of different ways in our lives. And it has the ability to be destructive, not only in our relationships with each other, but with the world around us. And I think it's helpful to kind of think, well, how did I get here? And so I wanted to spend some time just saying, hey, we're all in this situation. We're all a little bit messed up in this situation because of how we all have gotten here. And we are responsible to God for retraining ourselves a little bit as we mature. Anybody have a comment or a question? We've got about 2 or 3 minutes. Okay. Well, you are dismissed. Larry, would you lead us in prayer before we go?
Father in heaven, thank you for calling us into your family. And thank you for giving us your Spirit. Father, as we continue to seek you, I pray that you would help each one of us to grow maturity so that we will no longer be tossed about by our emotions, but will be able to reach out to others in love and tell them of your goodness and your greatness. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you.